The silence in the Afghan mountains was deceptive. For Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, lying flat against the rocky ground with his team scattered around him, that silence meant death was only seconds away. The Taliban fighters had them surrounded, their muzzle flashes creating deadly fireworks in the darkness. Rodriguez could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, competing with the distant sound of enemy boots crunching on gravel, getting closer with each passing second. This wasn't supposed to happen. The intelligence had been solid, the mission straightforward. Extract a high-value target from a compound 3 clicks south of their current position. Simple in, simple out. But now, with ammunition running low and nowhere to retreat, Rodriguez found himself questioning everything that had led them to this moment. Somewhere in the distance, a single rifle shot echoed across the valley. It wasn't from his team's weapons, and it certainly wasn't from the Taliban fighters closing in on them. The shot came from so far away that it seemed almost impossible, yet Rodriguez felt something shift in the air around them. The enemy voices grew confused, panicked even. What happened next would become legend among Special Operations Forces, but for Rodriguez and his team, pinned down in those unforgiving mountains, it was simply about surviving the next 5 minutes. They had no way of knowing that their salvation was coming from a source so unexpected, so unlikely, that even years later, some would refuse to believe the story was true. This is that story, a story of brotherhood, impossible odds, and a shot that defied everything they thought they knew about warfare in the mountains of Afghanistan. The helicopter's rotors cut through the night air like whispered prayers, carrying 8 Navy SEALs toward what intelligence had assured them was a routine extraction mission. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez pressed his face against the small window, watching the Afghan landscape roll beneath them like a moonlit ocean of stone and sand. The mountains jutted upward like broken teeth, their peaks shrouded in darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. Rodriguez had been doing this for 12 years, long enough to know that no mission was ever truly routine. Every operation in this godforsaken country carried the potential for disaster, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way Lieutenant Commander Jackson had briefed them earlier, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something Rodriguez couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was the fact that their target was a Taliban commander named Khalil Hakim, a man who had supposedly been dead for 6 months according to previous intel reports. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 2 minutes to insertion point, gentlemen. Weather's holding, but we've got cloud cover rolling in from the west. Rodriguez adjusted his night vision goggles and checked his weapon for the 10th time since takeoff. Beside him, Petty Officer First Class Tommy Ghost Williams was methodically arranging his medical supplies, his movements precise despite the helicopter's vibration. Ghost had earned his nickname not from his pale complexion, but from his ability to appear wherever wounded teammates needed him most, often seeming to materialize out of nowhere during firefights. "You nervous, Sarge?" asked Petty Officer Second Class Jake Bulldog Morrison from across the cabin. At 24, Morrison was the youngest member of their team, but his steady hand with explosives had saved their lives more times than Rodriguez cared to count. "Nervous is good," Rodriguez replied, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. "Nervous keeps you alive. Overconfident gets you killed." The team consisted of 8 men who had trained together for 2 years, becoming a precision instrument of warfare. There was Petty Officer First Class David Prophet Kim, their communications specialist who could establish contact with base camp from inside a cave if necessary. Chief Petty Officer Mike Hammer Thompson served as their heavy weapons expert, a mountain of a man who could carry enough ammunition to supply a small army. Petty Officer Second Class Carlos Spider Mendez was their reconnaissance specialist, capable of moving through enemy territory like smoke through glass. Leading them was Lieutenant Commander William Ice Jackson, a 15-year veteran who had never lost a man under his command. His call sign wasn't ironic. Jackson possessed an almost supernatural calm under fire that had become legendary among Special Operations Forces. Finally, there was Petty Officer Third Class Anthony "Rookie" Patterson, who despite his nickname had been with the team for 8 months and had already proven himself in 3 combat deployments. The helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone, a small clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings that would provide cover during insertion. Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten as they approached the ground, not from fear, but from the familiar anticipation that came before every mission. This feeling had kept him alive through countless operations, a heightened awareness that made every sense more acute, every muscle more responsive. The insertion went flawlessly. One by one, the SEALs fast roped from the helicopter onto the rocky ground, their movements swift and silent. Within 30 seconds, the aircraft disappeared into the night, leaving them alone in the Afghan wilderness. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant wind whistling through mountain passes. Jackson's voice came through their radio headsets in a whisper. Prophet, establish comms with base. Ghost, medical check on all personnel. Everyone else, defensive perimeter. We move in 5 minutes. The intelligence briefing had been straightforward enough. Khalil Hakim, a mid-level Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition supply convoys, was supposedly hiding in a compound approximately 3 kilometers from their insertion point. The compound was described as a typical Afghan structure: mud brick walls, flat roof, minimal security. Hakim would be traveling with a small protection detail, no more than 4 or 5 men. What had troubled Rodriguez during the briefing was the source of the intelligence. It had come from a local informant whose reliability was rated as questionable at best. In Rodriguez's experience, questionable intelligence had a way of becoming deadly surprises in the middle of operations. As they moved through the rocky terrain toward their target, Rodriguez found himself studying the landscape with increasing unease. The mountains around them created perfect ambush positions, and the narrow valleys they were forced to traverse offered limited escape routes. Every shadow could conceal an enemy fighter. Every rock formation could hide a sniper's nest. Prophet's voice whispered through their headsets. Base confirms mission is still green light. No changes to target location or intelligence assessment. Spider, moving point position 50 meters ahead of the main group, reported back. Multiple footpaths converging on target area. Recent foot traffic, maybe 6 to 8 individuals. Tracks are maybe 12 hours old, possibly less. This was encouraging news. If Hakim was indeed at the compound with a small security detail, the footprint matched what they had been told to expect. Rodriguez allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism as they continued their approach. The compound appeared exactly as described in their intelligence briefing. A rectangular structure with walls approximately 8 feet high, constructed from local stone and mud brick. A single entrance faced south, and intelligence photos had shown minimal defensive positions around the perimeter. Through their night vision equipment, the SEALs could see warm signatures inside the structure, 3 individuals based on their thermal readings. Jackson positioned his men around the compound with practiced efficiency. Hammer took an elevated position on a rocky outcropping 30 meters north of the structure, his heavy machine gun providing overwatch for the assault team. Spider and Prophet established a perimeter watch to the east and west, while Ghost remained with the assault element as medical support. Rodriguez, Morrison, and Patterson would accompany Jackson in the direct assault on the compound. Their objective was simple: capture Khalil Hakim alive if possible, eliminate any resistance they encountered, and extract back to the pickup zone within 45 minutes. As they approached the compound's entrance, Rodriguez felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the final moments before contact. His weapon felt comfortable in his hands, his gear moved silently across his body, and his mind focused on the immediate tactical situation with laser-like intensity. This was what 12 years of training and combat experience had prepared him for. Jackson gave the final signal, and Morrison placed a small explosive charge on the compound's wooden door. The blast would be just large enough to create an entry point without bringing down the entire structure. As Morrison armed the charge, Rodriguez took his position on the left side of the entrance, while Jackson and Patterson moved to the right. The explosion was sharp and brief, creating a cloud of dust and debris that would provide concealment for their entry. Rodriguez was through the door first, his weapons sweeping left, while Jackson moved right, and Patterson provided rear security. Ghost followed immediately behind, ready to provide medical support if needed. The compound's interior was larger than it had appeared from outside, divided into 3 rooms connected by narrow doorways. In the main room, they found evidence of recent habitation. Warm tea glasses, sleeping mats still bearing body heat, personal belongings scattered as if their owners had left quickly. "Room clear," Rodriguez whispered into his headset. "No personnel, but recent occupation confirmed." Jackson's voice came back immediately. "Search the other rooms. They can't have gone far." As Rodriguez moved toward the rear of the compound, he heard Prophet's voice crackling through his earpiece. "Multiple heat signatures moving toward your position from the north. Count at least 12 individuals, possibly more. They're approximately 200 meters out and closing fast." Rodriguez felt his blood turn to ice. 12 fighters was 3 times what their intelligence had suggested, and their approach from the north meant the SEALs were about to be trapped between the compound and a superior enemy force. Jackson's calm voice cut through the growing tension. "All positions, prepare for contact." This was a setup, people. Hakeem was never here, and we're about to have company. Spider's urgent whisper came through their headsets. "Movement to the west as well. I count at least 8 more fighters. They're trying to surround us." Rodriguez realized with growing horror that they had walked into a carefully planned ambush. The compound had been bait, the intelligence deliberately planted to lure them into a kill zone. Somewhere out there, enemy fighters were moving into position to eliminate an entire SEAL team. Hammer's voice boomed through their communications. "I got visual on the northern group. They're armed with automatic weapons and RPGs. These aren't farmers with hunting rifles. This is a coordinated military operation." As Rodriguez processed this information, he heard the first gunshots echoing across the valley. The Taliban fighters had opened fire, their muzzle flashes creating deadly stars in the darkness around the compound. The SEALs were outnumbered at least 3-1, trapped in terrain that favored the enemy, with limited ammunition and no immediate prospect of extraction. The mission had gone from routine to deadly in a matter of minutes, and Rodriguez knew that their survival now depended on training, teamwork, and a considerable amount of luck. As bullets began impacting the mud brick walls around them, he prepared himself for what might be the longest night of his life. The real battle was just beginning, and somewhere in the darkness surrounding them, an enemy force with superior numbers and intimate knowledge of the terrain was closing in for the kill. For Rodriguez and his team, the next few hours would test everything they had learned about warfare, brotherhood, and the will to survive against impossible odds. The first rocket-propelled grenade struck the compound's eastern wall with devastating force, sending chunks of mud brick and stone flying through the air like deadly confetti. Rodriguez threw himself against the floor as the explosion's shockwave rolled over him, his ears ringing from the blast. Through the settling dust and debris, he could see Jackson motioning frantically for the team to evacuate the structure. "Move, move, move." Jackson's voice cut through the chaos as automatic weapons fire began raking the compound from multiple directions. "This position is compromised. We need to reach the high ground." Rodriguez scrambled toward the destroyed entrance, his weapon ready as he prepared to dash into the kill zone that the compound had become. Outside, muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireflies, and the distinctive crack of AK-47s mixed with the heavier reports of RPK machine guns. The Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in a rough semicircle around the compound, creating overlapping fields of fire that would make any escape attempt a deadly gamble. Hammer's heavy machine gun opened up from his elevated position, sending streams of tracer rounds into the enemy positions to the north. The sustained fire from his weapon created enough suppression to allow the assault team to begin their withdrawal from the compound. Rodriguez sprinted through the doorway, diving behind a low stone wall as bullets chewed up the ground where he had been standing moments before. Ghost emerged next, carrying their medical equipment while maintaining his weapons readiness. A bullet struck the wall inches from his head, sending stone fragments across his face, but he never broke stride. Patterson followed immediately behind, his young face set in grim concentration as he calculated their tactical situation. "Prophet, what's our extraction timeline?" Jackson's voice came through their headsets as he took cover behind a cluster of boulders 20 meters from Rodriguez's position. "Extraction bird is 45 minutes out," Prophet replied, his voice strained as he attempted to maintain communications while returning fire at enemy positions to the east. "Base is monitoring our situation, but the closest support is a Apache gunship 30 minutes away." Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. 30 minutes might as well have been 30 hours in their current situation. The Taliban fighters were closing their net systematically, moving from cover to cover with tactical precision that suggested military training. These weren't the typical insurgent fighters they usually encountered. This was a coordinated operation plan specifically to eliminate American Special Operations Forces. Spider's voice crackled through their communications. "Western approach is compromised. I count at least 10 fighters moving through the rocks, and they've got heavy weapons. They're trying to cut off our route to the extraction point." Morrison had taken position behind an overturned cart near the compound's southern wall, his explosives pack ready to create diversions if necessary. "I can lay charges to slow their advance," he offered, "but we're going to need more than party tricks to get out of this mess." The enemy fire was intensifying with each passing minute. Rodriguez could hear the distinct whistle of incoming mortars, and he pressed himself deeper into cover as the first rounds impacted around their positions. The Taliban fighters were bringing everything they had to bear on the trapped SEALs, turning the narrow valley into a nightmare of flying metal and explosive destruction. Jackson was thinking rapidly, his mind processing their tactical options with the speed that had kept his teams alive through countless engagements. "Hammer, can you suppress the northern positions long enough for us to move toward the extraction point?" "Negative," Hammer replied, his words punctuated by bursts from his machine gun. "They've got us bracketed with mortars. If I maintain this position much longer, I'm going to be paced on these rocks." Rodriguez realized they were facing a classic kill zone scenario. The enemy had superior numbers, intimate knowledge of the terrain, and had positioned their forces to prevent any meaningful withdrawal. The SEALs' superior training and equipment were being neutralized by tactical disadvantages that no amount of skill could overcome. A mortar round exploded 15 meters to Rodriguez's left, showering him with dirt and rock fragments. The blast was close enough that he felt the heat wash across his face, and he knew the Taliban gunners were walking their fire closer to their positions with each adjustment. "We need to break contact," Rodriguez called out to Jackson. "This position is becoming untenable." "Agreed," Jackson replied. "But they've got every avenue of withdrawal covered. We move now, we're going to take casualties." Ghost had worked his way to a position where he could observe their tactical situation more clearly. "I can see approximately 20 fighters to our north and west," he reported. "They're equipped with night vision and appear to be using coordinated fire and movement tactics. This isn't random. They've done this before." The realization hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a trap that had been specifically designed to eliminate American Special Operations Forces. The Taliban fighters knew their tactics, had studied their procedures, and had created a scenario that neutralized their technological and training advantages. Patterson's voice came through their headsets, tight with controlled fear. "Movement to the south. They're trying to complete the encirclement." Spider confirmed the sighting, multiple fighters moving through the valley floor. "They'll have us completely surrounded within 10 minutes. Rodriguez understood that they were facing a nightmare scenario that every special operations soldier trained for, but hoped never to encounter. Trapped in enemy territory, outnumbered by a coordinated enemy force, with limited ammunition and no immediate prospect of support. Their survival would depend on their ability to break the tactical stalemate before the enemy completed their encirclement. Prophet, contact base and inform them we need immediate air support, Jackson ordered. Tell them we're facing a coordinated attack by superior forces and request emergency extraction. Already did, Prophet replied grimly. Base acknowledges our situation, but confirms that air support is still 25 minutes out. The Apache is encountering mechanical difficulties and may be delayed further. Rodriguez checked his ammunition count and felt his heart sink. He had fired approximately half his basic load during the initial contact, and at their current rate of consumption, they would be out of ammunition long before help could arrive. Looking around at his teammates' faces, he could see the same calculation reflected in their expressions. Hammer's machine gun fell silent momentarily as he changed ammunition belts. During the brief lull in suppressive fire, the Taliban fighters pressed their advance more aggressively. Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes moving closer to their positions with each passing minute. They're going to overrun us if we stay here, Morrison called out, his voice barely audible over the increasing volume of enemy fire. Jackson was studying the terrain around their position, looking for any tactical advantage they could exploit. The rocky outcroppings that had provided concealment during their approach were now becoming a prison, limiting their mobility while providing excellent firing positions for their attackers. A sustained burst of automatic weapons fire forced Rodriguez to press himself flat against the rocky ground. Bullets struck the stones around him with metallic spanging sounds, sending sparks flying in all directions. The Taliban fighters were getting bolder, moving closer to the SEALs' positions as they sensed victory approaching. We need to consolidate our position, Jackson decided. Fall back to that cluster of boulders at grid reference 2847. We can establish a better defensive position there and maybe hold out until support arrives. The movement would be dangerous. Approximately 50 meters of open ground that the enemy had already bracketed with automatic weapons fire. But staying in their current positions meant certain death as the Taliban fighters continued to close their net. Rodriguez prepared himself for the sprint, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether he lived or died. Around him, his teammates were making similar preparations, checking weapons and equipment one final time before exposing themselves to enemy fire. Ghost had identified a wounded Taliban fighter approximately 30 meters to their east, and the man's agonized cries were providing the enemy with information about the SEALs' positions. "We need to silence that guy," Ghost whispered. "He's calling out our locations to his buddies." Spider had worked his way to a position where he could engage the wounded fighter, but doing so would expose him to fire from multiple enemy positions. "I can take the shot," he offered, "but I'll need covering fire to get out alive." Jackson made the tactical decision quickly. Hammer, Prophet, provide suppression on the northern positions. Spider, take your shot and get back to cover. Everyone else, prepare to move on my signal. The coordinated action began with Hammer's machine gun opening up on the enemy positions, sending streams of tracer rounds into the darkness. Prophet added his rifle fire to the suppression, while Spider exposed himself just long enough to eliminate the wounded Taliban fighter with a single precise shot. As the team prepared for their withdrawal movement, Rodriguez caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. Through his night vision equipment, he could see enemy fighters moving through positions that should have been impossible to reach without being detected. The Taliban forces weren't just surrounding them. They were infiltrating closer than anyone had realized. "Contact rear." Patterson's voice exploded through their headsets as he engaged Taliban fighters who had somehow worked their way to within 20 meters of their position. Rodriguez spun around to see muzzle flashes erupting from rocks they had assumed were unoccupied. The enemy had been moving through terrain the SEALs had considered impassable, using local knowledge and supreme stealth to position themselves for a devastating close-range assault. The tactical situation had gone from desperate to catastrophic in a matter of seconds. The SEALs were now taking fire from 3 directions, with enemy forces close enough that grenades became a viable weapon. Rodriguez realized with growing horror that they were facing the possibility of being overrun by superior numbers in close-quarters combat. "Fall back to the secondary position," Jackson ordered, but even as he spoke, automatic weapons fire was sweeping the route he had planned for their withdrawal. Rodriguez understood that they were trapped in a kill zone with no viable escape routes, facing an enemy that had planned this operation down to the smallest detail. Their training, equipment, and experience were being systematically neutralized by tactical circumstances that seemed designed specifically to eliminate American Special Operations Forces. As bullets continued to impact around their positions, and the sound of enemy voices grew closer in the darkness, Rodriguez prepared himself for what might be their final stand. Somewhere in the night, help was coming, but whether it would arrive in time had become a question that none of them could answer with any certainty. Rodriguez felt the hot breath of a bullet pass inches from his ear as he dove behind a cluster of jagged rocks. The Taliban fighters were now close enough that he could hear their voices calling to each other in Pashto, coordinating their final assault on the trapped SEALs. The metallic taste of fear filled his mouth, but his hands remained steady on his weapon as 12 years of combat experience took control of his body and mind. "Ammunition check." Jackson's voice cut through the chaos with supernatural calm. "Report your status." The answers came back quickly, and they painted a grim picture. Rodriguez had 23 rounds remaining in his current magazine, plus 2 spare magazines. Ghost reported similar numbers, while Hammer was down to his final belt of ammunition for the machine gun. Prophet had enough rifle rounds for perhaps 10 minutes of sustained engagement, and Spider was conserving his sniper ammunition for high-value targets. Morrison had his explosives, but in their current tactical situation, using them risked bringing down rocky debris on their own positions. Patterson, despite his relative inexperience, was managing his ammunition with veteran precision, but even his disciplined fire couldn't stretch their remaining supplies much longer. "We got maybe 15 minutes before we're throwing rocks," Rodriguez whispered to Jackson during a brief lull in enemy fire. Jackson's response was interrupted by the distinctive whistle of incoming rocket-propelled grenades. "RPGs incoming. Take cover." The explosions came in rapid succession, sending cascades of rock fragments across their defensive position. Rodriguez felt something hot slice across his left shoulder and realized that shrapnel had found its mark. The wound wasn't serious, but it served as a reminder that their situation was deteriorating with each passing minute. Ghost had worked his way to Rodriguez's position to check the wound. "Just a scratch," he confirmed, applying a quick field dressing. "But you're bleeding like a stuck pig. Try not to leave a trail for them to follow." Spider's voice crackled through their headsets with urgency. "I count approximately 30 fighters now. They've been reinforced, and they're moving into assault positions. We got maybe 5 minutes before they rush us." The number hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. 30 enemy fighters against 8 SEALs with dwindling ammunition was mathematics that no amount of training could overcome. He found himself thinking about his family back home. His wife Maria, his 2 daughters who were probably asleep in their beds, safe and unaware that their father was fighting for his life in a godforsaken valley half a world away. Prophet had maintained communications with their base throughout the engagement, providing continuous updates on their situation. "Base confirms air support is still 15 minutes out," he reported. "They're scrambling additional assets, but the closest Apache is dealing with mechanical problems." "What about the extraction bird?" Patterson asked, his voice tight with controlled fear. "Still 20 minutes out, assuming they can find a safe landing zone," Prophet replied. "Base is advising us to hold position and await support." Rodriguez almost laughed at the absurdity of the instruction. Hold position was exactly what they were doing. They were trapped with no choice but to hold position until they were either rescued or overrun. Hammer's machine gun had fallen silent as he conserved his remaining ammunition for the final assault he knew was coming. From his elevated position, he had the best view of enemy movement, and his reports were becoming increasingly desperate. "They're massing for a coordinated attack," he reported. multiple groups moving into position from all directions. This is going to be a simultaneous assault designed to overwhelm our defensive positions. Jackson was calculating rapidly, weighing their tactical options against the harsh realities of their situation. Morrison, can you use your explosives to create a diversion? Maybe collapse some of these rock formations to disrupt their assault. Morrison studied the terrain around their position. I can bring down that rocky overhang to the north, he offered. It might take out a few of them and definitely slow down their advance. But the blast is going to reveal our exact position to everyone within a mile radius. Do it, Jackson ordered. We need to disrupt their timing, even if it's temporary. As Morrison prepared his charges, Rodriguez found himself studying the faces of his teammates. These men had become his brothers through shared training, combat, and the unique bond that develops between warriors who trust each other with their lives. The thought of any of them not making it home was almost unbearable. Ghost had positioned himself where he could provide medical support during the coming assault, but Rodriguez could see the grim determination in his eyes. The medic knew as well as anyone that their survival chances were diminishing rapidly, yet he maintained his focus on keeping the team combat effective for as long as possible. Spider had found a position that allowed him to observe enemy movement while remaining concealed from most of their positions. They're moving into final assault positions, he whispered. I can see teams of 4 or 5 fighters positioned approximately 50 meters out from our perimeter. They're waiting for a signal to begin the attack. Rodriguez checked his weapon one more time, ensuring that his remaining magazines were positioned for quick reloading. He had been in desperate situations before, but never anything approaching the hopelessness of their current circumstances. Yet somehow, the presence of his teammates gave him strength to continue fighting. Prophet's communications equipment had been damaged by shrapnel from the recent explosions, but he was still maintaining sporadic contact with their base. I'm getting broken transmissions, he reported. Sounds like they're scrambling every available asset to support us, but everything is still at least 10 minutes out. Morrison had finished placing his charges on the rocky overhang that dominated the northern approach to their position. Charges set, he announced. When I detonate, we'll have maybe 30 seconds of confusion to reposition or engage targets of opportunity. Jackson made the tactical decision. On detonation, everyone shifts positions clockwise. New defensive positions behind those boulders to the east. Move fast and keep your heads down. The explosion was tremendous, sending tons of rock crashing down on the Taliban positions below. Rodriguez felt the shockwave roll over their position like a physical force, and for a moment, the enemy fire slackened as fighters scrambled to avoid the falling debris. Move now, Jackson commanded, and the SEALs began their tactical repositioning under cover of the dust and confusion created by Morrison's explosives. Rodriguez sprinted across the open ground, diving behind a new cluster of rocks as automatic weapons fire resumed around their position. The temporary disruption had bought them perhaps 2 minutes, but the Taliban fighters were already adapting to the changed terrain and repositioning for their assault. Patterson had found himself separated from the main group during the movement, trapped behind a small boulder approximately 20 meters from the rest of the team. Enemy fire was preventing him from rejoining his teammates, and Rodriguez could see the young SEAL's position being bracketed by Taliban fighters moving in from 2 directions. Rookie's cut off, Rodriguez reported to Jackson. He's got maybe 30 seconds before they overrun his position. Without hesitation, Ghost began moving toward Patterson's location, using the rocky terrain for concealment. I'm going after him, he announced, his voice calm despite the deadly situation. Negative, Jackson ordered. We can't afford to lose 2 people attempting a rescue. But Ghost was already in motion, using his medical training and combat experience to navigate through the kill zone toward Patterson's isolated position. Rodriguez watched in amazement as the medic somehow managed to avoid the streams of bullets filling the air around him. Spider had acquired targets during the confusion following Morrison's explosion and was engaging enemy fighters with precise rifle fire. Each shot he took was carefully calculated to disrupt the Taliban assault, while conserving his limited ammunition. "I can see their assault teams preparing to move," he reported. "They're going to hit us from 3 directions simultaneously." Rodriguez realized that the enemy was about to launch the final assault that would determine the outcome of the engagement. Their superior numbers, intimate knowledge of the terrain, and tactical coordination were about to be brought to bear against the trapped SEALs in a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm their defensive capabilities. Hammer had repositioned his machine gun to cover the most likely avenue of enemy approach, but with limited ammunition remaining, he would only be able to provide suppressive fire for a brief period. "I've got enough ammo for maybe 2 minutes of sustained fire," he reported. After that, it's rifles and pistols. Prophet had managed to re-establish partial communications with their base. "Base reports air support is now 10 minutes out," he announced. "Apache gunship is airborne and vectoring toward our position." 10 minutes might as well have been 10 hours in their current situation. Rodriguez could see Taliban fighters moving into final assault positions, their weapons trained on the SEALs' defensive perimeter. The next few minutes would determine whether any of them lived to see their families again. Jackson's voice cut through the tension one final time before the assault began. "Gentlemen, it's been an honor serving with you. Give them everything we've got, and make every shot count. Stay together, watch each other's backs, and maybe some of us will make it home to tell this story." Rodriguez felt a strange sense of calm settle over him as the enemy assault began. This was what his entire military career had prepared him for, a moment when training, courage, and brotherhood would be tested against impossible odds. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, he was surrounded by the finest warriors he had ever known, and they would face their fate together. The sound of enemy voices grew louder in the darkness as the Taliban fighters prepared for their final rush. Rodriguez took aim at the shadows moving through the rocks and prepared to sell his life as dearly as possible. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the faint sound of helicopter rotors, but whether help would arrive in time had become a question that only the next few minutes would answer. The Taliban assault began with a coordinated barrage of automatic weapons fire that seemed to turn the very air around the SEALs into a deadly storm of metal. Rodriguez pressed himself against the rocky ground as bullets struck the stones around him, sending sparks and fragments flying in all directions. The enemy fighters were advancing in small teams, using fire and movement tactics that spoke of professional military training. "They're coming from all sides." Patterson's voice crackled through their headsets from his isolated position. Ghost had managed to reach the young SEAL, but now both men were pinned down by overlapping fields of fire that made any movement suicidal. Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes advancing through the darkness like deadly fireflies, each one representing an enemy fighter moving closer to their defensive perimeter. The Taliban forces were executing their assault with precision that was terrifying in its effectiveness. These weren't desperate insurgents making a reckless charge. This was a carefully planned military operation designed to eliminate American Special Operations Forces. Hammer's machine gun opened up with devastating effect, sweeping the northern approach and forcing the attacking fighters to seek cover. But Rodriguez could hear the distinctive sound of the weapon's rate of fire decreasing as Hammer conserved ammunition, trying to make every burst count. The big man was buying them time, but everyone knew his suppressive fire couldn't last much longer. Spider had found a position that allowed him to engage enemy fighters with his sniper rifle, but even his precise marksmanship couldn't significantly reduce the numbers arrayed against them. "I count at least 25 fighters still active," he reported grimly. "They're taking casualties, but they keep coming." Jackson was moving between positions, coordinating their defense while engaging targets with his rifle. Despite the hopelessness of their situation, his voice remained calm and controlled. "Concentrate fire on the assault teams. Make them pay for every meter they advance." Morrison had exhausted most of his explosive devices creating the diversion earlier, but he still had enough charges to make the enemy's final assault costly. "I can lay charges on the most likely approach routes," he offered. "It won't stop them, but it might slow them down." Prophet was struggling to maintain communications as enemy fire intensified around their position. Base reports air support is now 5 minutes out, he announced between bursts of incoming fire. Apache gunship is requesting our exact position for gun runs. 5 minutes felt like an eternity as Rodriguez watched enemy fighters advancing steadily toward their perimeter. He had been in countless firefights during his military career, but never anything approaching the intensity and hopelessness of their current situation. The Taliban forces seemed willing to accept unlimited casualties to ensure the elimination of the trapped SEALs. A rocket-propelled grenade exploded 20 meters to Rodriguez's left, showering him with debris and nearly deafening him with its blast. Through the ringing in his ears, he could hear enemy voices getting closer, speaking in urgent Pashto as they coordinated their final assault. Ghost's medical training was being put to the ultimate test as he treated wounds while continuing to engage enemy fighters. A bullet had grazed Patterson's leg during the initial moments of the assault, but the young SEAL was still combat effective despite the pain. Rookie's hurt but mobile, Ghost reported. Minor wound to the left thigh. Rodriguez checked his ammunition count and felt his heart sink. He was down to his final magazine, and at their current rate of consumption, they would be out of ammunition within minutes. Around him, his teammates were facing similar shortages, and the grim mathematics of warfare were working against them with each passing second. Hammer's machine gun had fallen silent as he conserved his remaining ammunition for the final moments of the assault. From his elevated position, he could see enemy fighters positioning themselves for the decisive rush that would overrun the SEALs' position. They're massing for the final assault, he reported. Multiple teams preparing to advance simultaneously. Spider had identified what appeared to be the Taliban commander, a tall figure moving between assault teams while coordinating the attack. I have eyes on what looks like their leadership element, he whispered. Range approximately 100 meters, moving between positions on the eastern slope. Jackson made the tactical decision immediately. Take the shot if you have a clear opportunity. Eliminating their command element might disrupt their coordination. As Spider prepared for what might be the most important shot of his career, Rodriguez found himself thinking about the impossibility of their situation. 8 SEALs against 30 Taliban fighters in terrain that favored the enemy, with limited ammunition and no immediate prospect of support. Yet somehow they were still fighting, still holding their defensive positions through sheer determination and professional skill. The sound of approaching helicopter rotors was becoming more distinct, cutting through the chaos of automatic weapons fire and explosions. Prophet managed to establish clear communications with the incoming Apache gunship, providing target coordinates and friendly positions to prevent friendly fire incidents. Apache 1-7, this is Prophet. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate gun runs on targets north and west of our position. Friendlies are marked with infrared strobes. The helicopter pilot's voice came through clearly. Prophet, Apache 1-7 has visual on your strobes. We're beginning attack, runs on enemy positions. Keep your heads down, this is going to be loud. Rodriguez felt a surge of hope as he heard the distinctive sound of the Apache's chain gun opening fire. The 30mm cannon sent streams of explosive rounds into the Taliban positions, creating devastating effects among the attacking fighters. But even as he watched enemy positions being destroyed by the gunship's firepower, he realized that many of the Taliban fighters were too close to the SEAL's position for the helicopter to engage safely. Apache 1-7, be advised that enemy forces are within 50 meters of our position on multiple approaches, Prophet reported. Request close support, but danger close on all approaches. The helicopter pilot's response was professional but grim. Understood, Prophet. We'll engage targets beyond 50 meters, but you're going to have to handle the close-in threats yourselves. Rodriguez understood the tactical reality. The Apache gunship could devastate enemy forces at longer ranges, but the Taliban fighters who had closed to within 50 meters of the SEAL's position were essentially immune to air support. The final phase of the battle would be decided by small arms fire and individual courage. Spider had been tracking the Taliban commander through his rifle scope, waiting for a clear shot that wouldn't risk hitting friendly forces. "I've got the commander in my sights," he whispered. "Range 90 meters, partially concealed behind rocks. It's a difficult shot, but doable. Take it," Jackson ordered without hesitation. As Spider prepared to fire, a sustained burst of automatic weapons fire forced Rodriguez to press himself flat against the rocky ground. Bullets were striking the stones around him with metallic impacts that sent sparks flying in all directions. The Taliban fighters were now close enough that he could hear individual voices calling out commands and coordinates. Morrison had positioned his remaining explosive charges along the most likely approaches to their position. "Charges are set," he announced. "When they start the final rush, I can detonate and take out anyone within 20 meters of the perimeter." Ghost and Patterson had managed to suppress the enemy fighters threatening their isolated position, but their ammunition situation was becoming critical. "We're down to our final magazines," Ghost reported. "If they rush us now, we won't be able to hold them off." Hammer had repositioned himself to provide covering fire for Ghost and Patterson's withdrawal to the main defensive position. "I can provide suppression for 30 seconds, he announced. "That should be enough time for them to reach us, but after that, I'm out of ammunition." Rodriguez realized they were approaching the final moments of the engagement. The Apache gunship was devastating enemy positions beyond 50 meters, but the Taliban fighters within close range were preparing for a final assault that would overwhelm the SEALs' depleted ammunition supplies and overrun their defensive positions. Jackson's voice cut through the chaos with supernatural calm. "Gentlemen, this is it. Make every shot count, watch each other's backs, and remember that we're SEALs. We don't quit, we don't surrender, and we don't leave anyone behind." As the Taliban fighters prepared for their final rush, Rodriguez took aim at the shadows moving through the rocks and prepared to fight to the last bullet. The mathematical odds against them were overwhelming, but mathematics didn't account for the courage, training, and brotherhood that had carried them through countless previous engagements. Then, cutting through the chaos of automatic weapons fire, explosions, and helicopter rotor noise, came a sound that would change everything. A single rifle shot, fired from such a great distance that it seemed almost impossibly far away. The shot echoed across the valley like thunder, and in the seconds that followed, something fundamental shifted in the tactical situation around them. Rodriguez heard confused voices among the Taliban fighters, their coordinated assault suddenly disrupted by something none of them had anticipated. The single rifle shot had come from a direction and distance that seemed to defy the tactical realities of their engagement. Spider's voice came through their headsets with amazement. "Did anyone else hear that shot? It came from at least 800 meters out, maybe further. Who the hell is shooting at that range?" As the echoes of the mysterious rifle shot faded across the valley, Rodriguez found himself wondering if their salvation was approaching from the most unlikely source imaginable. Someone, somewhere in the darkness surrounding their desperate battle, had just fired a shot that would become the stuff of special operations legend. The confusion among the Taliban fighters was immediate and profound. Rodriguez could hear their voices rising in panic and uncertainty as they tried to understand where the distant rifle shot had originated. The carefully coordinated assault that had been moments away from overwhelming the SEALs' position suddenly lost its momentum as enemy fighters began looking over their shoulders into the darkness beyond their perimeter. Another shot rang out across the valley, this one followed immediately by the distinctive sound of a body falling among the rocks. Spider, observing through his rifle scope, reported with amazement, "Enemy fighter down. Range approximately 100 meters from us, which means the shooter is at least 900 meters out. That's an incredible shot in these conditions." Rodriguez felt the tactical situation shifting around them as the mysterious sniper continued to engage Taliban fighters from impossible ranges. Each shot was precisely placed, eliminating key personnel and disrupting the enemy's command structure with surgical precision. The psychological effect on the attacking fighters was devastating. They had gone from confident assault to panic confusion in a matter of minutes. Jackson's voice cut through their communications with urgent questions. Prophet, are we expecting any friendly sniper teams in this area? Did base mention any special operations units providing overwatch? Prophet was frantically checking his communications equipment and reviewing their mission briefing materials. Negative on friendly snipers, he replied. Base made no mention of any supporting elements beyond air assets. According to our intelligence, we're the only American forces in this sector. A third rifle shot echoed across the mountains, followed by the sound of more Taliban fighters scrambling for cover. The enemy assault had completely stalled as fighters who had been advancing confidently toward the SEALs' position now found themselves seeking protection from an unknown marksman operating from extraordinary range. Spider was attempting to locate the mysterious sniper through his own scope, scanning the distant ridgelines for any sign of muzzle flash or movement. I can't see him, he reported with professional respect. Whoever this is, they're operating from ranges that most people would consider impossible. These aren't lucky shots. This is precision marksmanship at the highest level. Hammer had used the disruption caused by the sniper fire to reposition his machine gun for better coverage of their defensive perimeter. Enemy assault has stalled, he confirmed. They're taking cover and trying to figure out where the shots are coming from. This is buying us time, but I don't know how long it will last. The Apache gunship overhead had also noticed a change in enemy behavior and was capitalizing on the confusion to engage previously inaccessible targets. Prophet, Apache 1-7 observing enemy forces in disarray. We're engaging targets of opportunity while they're exposed. Whatever's happening down there, it's working in your favor. Rodriguez found himself studying the distant mountainous terrain, trying to comprehend the skill level required for the shots they were witnessing. The ranges involved were extraordinary even by special operations standards, and the accuracy being demonstrated suggested a marksman of almost mythical ability. Morrison had taken advantage of the tactical pause to redistribute ammunition among the team, ensuring that everyone had enough rounds to continue the fight if the Taliban forces regrouped. We've got maybe 10 more minutes of sustained engagement with current supplies, he reported. After that, we're down to pistols and harsh language. Ghost and Patterson had successfully withdrawn from their isolated position during the confusion caused by the sniper fire, rejoining the main defensive perimeter with minor wounds, but intact combat capability. Rookie took some shrapnel, but he's still mission-capable, Ghost reported as he applied fresh dressings to Patterson's leg wound. Prophet had established communications with the incoming extraction helicopter, providing updated landing zone information and tactical situation reports. Extraction bird is 5 minutes out, he announced. They're requesting current enemy situation and recommended approach vectors. Jackson was calculating rapidly, trying to determine whether they could hold their position long enough for the extraction helicopter to reach them safely. Prophet advised extraction bird that enemy forces are currently disrupted by unknown friendly sniper fire, but the situation could change rapidly. Recommend fast approach and immediate extraction upon touchdown. As if summoned by Jackson's words, another rifle shot cracked across the valley, this one followed by the sound of multiple Taliban fighters shouting in alarm. Rodriguez realized that the mysterious sniper was specifically targeting enemy leaders and key personnel, systematically destroying the command structure that had coordinated the ambush. Spider had been keeping count of the distant shots. That's 7 confirmed hits at ranges exceeding 800 meters, he reported with professional admiration. In mountain terrain at night, with wind factors and elevation changes. This is shooting that most people would consider impossible. The psychological impact on the Taliban fighters was becoming more pronounced with each passing minute. Rodriguez could hear their voices becoming more frantic as they tried to withdraw from positions that had suddenly become death traps. The carefully planned ambush was disintegrating into chaos as the unknown marksmen continued to eliminate their personnel with uncanny precision. Hammer had repositioned himself to observe enemy withdrawal routes and was reporting on their movements. They're pulling back, he announced with barely concealed amazement. Multiple fighters moving away from our perimeter toward the valley floor. They're abandoning their assault positions. Rodriguez felt a surge of hope as he realized that their impossible situation was somehow transforming into a potential survival scenario. The mysterious sniper had single-handedly disrupted a coordinated enemy assault and was now covering their withdrawal, allowing the Taliban forces to escape while ensuring they maintained distance from the trapped SEALs. Prophet's communications crackled with updates from their base. Base confirms extraction helicopter is 2 minutes out. Apache gunship reports enemy forces in general withdrawal from engagement area. Unknown marksman is providing effective overwatch for friendly forces. Jackson was already preparing the team for extraction procedures. Prepare for immediate departure upon helicopter arrival. Wounded personnel board first. Heavy weapons and sensitive equipment secured for transport. We're going home, gentlemen. As Rodriguez prepared his equipment for extraction, he found himself wondering about the identity of their savior. The shooting they had witnessed represented a level of marksmanship that existed in the realm of legend rather than reality. Yet someone had been out there in the darkness, watching over them with skills that defied conventional understanding. The extraction helicopter appeared as a shadow against the stars, its approach masked by the sound of the Apache gunship still circling overhead. Rodriguez could see the aircraft's crew chiefs preparing for a combat extraction, their weapons trained on the surrounding terrain as they prepared to collect the embattled SEALs. Spider was still scanning the distant ridgelines through his scope, hoping to catch a glimpse of the marksman who had saved their lives. "I've got nothing," he reported with frustration. "Whoever this guy is, he's gone. Vanished like smoke." The helicopter touched down with practiced precision, its crew immediately beginning the extraction process as the SEALs moved toward the aircraft under covering fire from their teammates. Rodriguez could feel the rotor washing over him like a promise of safety and home. As they lifted off from the valley floor, Rodriguez caught a final glimpse of the terrain where they had nearly died. Somewhere in those mountains, an unknown marksman had demonstrated shooting skills that would become the stuff of special operations legend. The man's identity remained a mystery, but his intervention had meant the difference between death and survival for 8 American warriors. Ghost was treating Patterson's wounds during the flight back to base, his medical skills ensuring that the young SEAL would make a full recovery. "Clean through and through," he announced over the helicopter's intercom. "He'll be back on duty within a week." Prophet had re-established full communications with their base and was providing detailed after-action reports on their engagement. "Base is requesting complete debriefing on the unknown marksman," he announced. "Apparently, they're as curious about our guardian angel as we are." Jackson was already thinking about the official reports that would need to be written, trying to find words that could adequately describe what they had experienced. "How do you write a report about someone who doesn't exist?" he mused. Base is going to have a hard time believing this story. Rodriguez realized that their experience would become one of those legendary tales that circulate among special operations forces, passed down through generations of warriors as an example of the mysterious forces that sometimes intervene in the course of human events. The identity of their savior might never be known, but his intervention had ensured that 8 American families would not receive visits from casualty notification officers. As the helicopter carried them towards safety, Rodriguez found himself thinking about the shot that had changed everything. Somewhere in the Afghan mountains, a marksman of extraordinary skill had watched over them during their darkest hour, demonstrating that even in the most desperate circumstances, salvation could come from the most unexpected sources. The mission had begun as a routine extraction operation and had nearly ended in tragedy, but it had become something else entirely. A reminder that in the brotherhood of warriors, help sometimes comes from sources that defy explanation or understanding. Rodriguez knew that for the rest of his life, he would wonder about the identity of the man who had saved them with shots that seemed to transcend the boundaries of human possibility. Years later, when Rodriguez told this story to other warriors, some would believe and others would dismiss it as combat mythology. But for 8 Navy SEALs who had lived through the experience, The memory of those distant rifle shots would remain as clear as the day they first echoed across the valley, a testament to the mysterious forces that sometimes watch over those who serve in the darkness beyond the reach of home.